Well, shooters and reloaders out there, Fortune Cookie 45 LC coming to you from the hot lead zone. And you know how one of the precepts for the hot lead zone is you're going to hear stuff that you don't hear on other YouTube videos. Well, the title of this video is Counterpoint to Shooting from a Rest. Well, first of all, let's get it clear and out of the way that there's no argument that shooting from a rest or sandbags is the best way to shoot the smallest group that we can with any particular gun and load combination. That, after all, is the basis for the sport of bench rest shooting. Shoot the smallest groups possible. But the point we're trying to make here in this video is that it is not the only way to determine whether a gun or a load combination is accurate or not. Now, first of all, so that there is no offense to anyone out there, all the guns in this video have been checked and are not loaded. So, for instance, if I ever had a chance to meet the illustrious Hickok 45 at his compound and he was shooting a gun on one of his reviews, and he was shooting and knocking down his steel plates and all this kind of thing, it would never occur to me to ask him, well, why aren't you shooting from sandbags? Why aren't you shooting from a rest? And I don't think any of you viewers out there would think about asking him that either. In fact, you've never seen any kind of bench or sandbag on any of his videos. Now, I've actually studied Hickok 45's shooting, and he is such an exceptional shooter that he can hit with a flinch or he can hit without a flinch. He can also hit with moving sights and a moving gun. Not very many can do all that. Plus, Hickok 45 has the exceptional trigger control of any professional. Now, when Bob Munden was alive or he was doing his impossible shots, do you think you would ever ask him, why don't you shoot from a rest? Why don't you use sandbags? Is it possible that they don't need to use sandbags or a rest to do their shooting, or even to determine whether a gun is accurate or not, or whether ammunition is accurate or not? They can tell. They can shoot 2, 3, 4 shots and tell without shooting from a rest. Well, how's that possible? And the answer is the same way that we can tell if a gun or load is accurate or not without having to shoot from a rest or sandbags. We can tell that too. And it's the same way that it was done back in the black powder days and the early smokeless powder days. People didn't shoot from a rest. They didn't shoot from sandbags. Now, of course, we're not saying that they never went and used an old log or the side of a tree to kind of brace themselves against. Of course they did that. Shooting from a rest or sandbags was made popular when scoped rifles came into existence and became more popular because shooters couldn't use the scopes and work with a wobble as well. Same reason why scopes aren't used in NRA bullseye shooting, because of the wobble. It became very popular to zero scopes and shoot groups from sandbags or rests. But what's happened is the concept of shooting from a rest or sandbags has more or less taken over, and so every one of the shooters out there is being sold a bill of goods that that's the only way that we can tell if a gun is accurate or whether ammunition is accurate or not, by shooting from a rest or sandbags. Turns out that the principles of marksmanship are just as important whether you're shooting offhand or whether you're shooting from a rest or sandbags, or whether you're shooting from the very best rest there is for bench rest shooting. You still have to be able to shoot the marksmanship principles. Otherwise, in the sport of bench rest shooting, the human error would not be part of it. So the critical thing here is once a shooter has learned how to call their shots, that is the key point in the shooter being able to determine the accuracy of their gun or load combination, no matter if they're shooting offhand or from a rest or from sandbags. The skill of being able to call the shot is developed after working on the marksmanship principles and being able to inculcate the idea of sight picture, trigger squeeze, breath control, stance, grip, all of those things. And what calling the shot is once the gun goes off, the shooter can actually tell where that shot should have gone. So that if the shot goes there, then we know the gun and the load is accurate. And if we call the shot a number of times and the gun keeps shooting where we think the bullets should be going, then we know the gun is accurate and the load is accurate. And it doesn't matter if the shooter's accurate or not, because we call the shot low left and it went low left. We call it to the right and it goes to the right. That means the gun is accurate. Even though we're not shooting a very decent group, we know the gun is accurate. So you'll hear me use the term touched off. Well, what that term means is that everything looked good and felt good, and the trigger squeeze felt good, the release felt good, the gun went off, surprise break, and we know it's a good shot. We just touched it off. And if that shot hit dead center, then we are looking at an accurate gun load combination. Now, if we touch off 4 shots out of 5 and got a nice little clover leaf, but one of the rounds we called high right and it went high right, then we know that those 5 shots were good shots. Or heaven forbid, we didn't touch off that shot well and dropped the shot instead and it went low. It's a good accurate gun load combination, even though you got a flyer. Now that can happen whether you're shooting from sandbags or offhand. So shooting offhand doesn't mean it's inaccurate, doesn't mean that the shooter's trying to brag, doesn't mean the shooter is so good that he or she thinks they can shoot offhand and they're really trying to showcase their own skills. Not at all. And this idea that shooting from sandbags or a rest eliminates the human error, well, that's not really what happens. Human error is still there. It may be minimized a bit, but it's still there. If it were eliminated, then bench rest shooting would lose a lot of its challenge. And look at the tremendous amount of controversy over the use of different types of rests, or the quote unquote correct way to use sandbags. You'll hear some say that the barrel should not be on the sandbag should be against the front of the receiver and this joint right here. Well, what happens when the flash gap gases blow out there and destroy the sandbag? Some will say that the sandbag should be underneath here and the hands should be between the sandbag and the gun, or the butt of the gun can rest on the sandbag. You'll hear all kinds of things. Look at the design of this particular rest. That's designed to have the barrel sitting in there. And yet you'll see and hear that the barrel should never be on the rest. It's kind of like dynamite. Well, I watch a lot of YouTube videos and I see all the time comments being made, almost in an accusation fashion, that the shooter that did the video is trying to brag that they're shooting offhand, this kind of thing. And turns out that you can shoot from a sandbag or from a rest and not apply the shooting principles and you still can't tell whether the groups are any good or not, or whether the gun or load combination is any accurate or not. You can't tell. And an excellent shooter like Hickok 45 can fire a few shots and say this is an accurate gun and accurate ammunition, and we'll listen to that and say that's great, but then discount the other shooter who happens to be able to shoot and call his or her shots and can still tell the same thing, but we don't think that's valid because that shooter just happens to not be hitting the target. And we'll tell the one shooter that they should be shooting from sandbags or from a rest, and we won't tell the other shooter the same thing. Now, this video is not to misconstrue that Fortune Cookie 45 LLC is saying that anything goes. There's definitely a place for shooting from sandbags and from rests. Any shooter should be able to go ahead and do what they feel most confident with. But one of the main barometers is the way a particular shooter handles their gun and ammunition. If it looks like they know what they're doing with their stuff, you might look at what they're doing and say it might be okay. And by the way, zeroing any gun can be a matter of shooting 5 shots offhand where all 5 are touched off and called shots, and then go ahead and pick out the center of the 5-shot group and zero with that. Your gun will be zeroed. So shooters and reloaders out there, this has been a counterpoint to the idea of the absolute necessity to use rests and sandbags.